Morning, everyone. First, bring you greetings from Malawi. Moni nonse, takondwere kwambiri kukhala ndi mwayi wokhala nanu lero. Komanso ndabwera ndi moni ochokera kwa abale ndi alongo anu ku Malawi. Zikomo kwambiri. That's greetings from your brothers and sisters in Malawi. And at Namikango, they would of course want me to pass greetings to you. So I just want to say what a wonderful blessing it is to get to be here with you all. First, just to make sure everybody can hear me, we're good? We're working? Okay, great. Well, I was thinking about this coming here, and so thankful to Nathan and the leadership here for giving me the opportunity to come, because Anna Street was the first congregation, I think, that me and Becca visited when we were getting ready to go to Namikango. After they asked us if we would be willing to go, this was the first place that we came. And though we're not finished, we're out of Malawi now, and this is the first congregation that I've gotten to speak at since that. So kind of bookending my time here. So I feel really blessed to get to be with you all. I want to talk today about change. Ready for change? Question mark. Of course, I know this is a subject that's been a big subject over the last 3 years through COVID. Part of the interesting thing about being in Malawi is we haven't been able to be here and walk through all the different components of change that have taken place in the U.S. We've had our own context in Malawi. So I haven't really gotten to speak on this here, so this is my opportunity to do that. But not only that, for my family, of course, this is a real season of change and transition. For Namikango, it's the same, maybe the largest season of transition change that's taken place, certainly in our time, but maybe in the history of Namikango. And we'll talk about that some later. But that kind of gives context for why this subject today. And recently, just in some other reading, and I came across a Harvard Business Review. And it was an article that was from 1969 that they republished here in the last couple of years, addressing the question of why is it so difficult, why do people have such a hard time handling change? Why do we have a hard time handling change? And in that, one interesting thing that was noted, they said that continued efforts to change others actually prevent change. So even the very effort of trying to do something to change actually does the opposite. It prevents it. It brings about in us some desire to resist. And we all know that feeling, whether it's a family issue, whether it's in an organization or a business or church, we're comfortable. We like to be where we are, and change is always difficult. Another well-known writer, author, a guy named Friedman, in one of his more well-known works, talks about the same thing, just saying over and over again. In systems, change is always such a difficult thing to receive. But it's not only true in organizations or businesses, it's also true, I think, in the physical world. I'm sure somewhere in here we have medical people, but I heard a story not too long ago of a person receiving a heart transplant. And here they are in a bad situation, need to get a bad heart out, and they get a really healthy heart, and when it's put in the body does not immediately receive it. It instead rejects it because it's something of a foreign object. So here's this good thing, this life-saving thing being brought in, but it's perceived by the body in a very different way. And maybe it is just part of the natural world, the way that we work. That story also gives a picture of perception, the way that we see what comes, the way that we understand our circumstances. Jean was talking some this morning, asking questions that Jesus would have asked, and there was a bunch of scenarios there where Jesus saw one thing, and the disciples saw something different. The disciples saw a storm and danger, and Jesus saw it in a different way. Couple years ago, we were climbing in Malawi, our family, and this is a mountain not too far from our home. And get to the top, and this is what's at the top. It's a big rock, and on top of this, it's not pictured, there's a concrete pillar, kind of a beacon that says, you're at the top. And took a while to get up here, so we got there, saw it. pretty excited about being at the top. Looks like a normal rock, and we're glad to be up there. But when you get up close, what appears to be moss there ends up being this, which, if you can see that, it's just a bunch of little bugs. It's not a very pleasant picture. Even as I look at it, I have resistance to that. It's not something that I like. So in this scenario, something that appeared to be one way turned out to be different. In this case, not very good. So going from something appeared to be okay and ended up being a lot worse. That's not really where I want to go today, what I want to talk about. But it's an example of perceiving and misperceiving. Another time, we were in a hospital in Lubbock. This was actually at a time when Becca's mom was in the hospital. And there's this beautiful painting on the wall. And by itself, it's beautiful. But when you get up close to it, maybe specifically looking at the car, the vehicle there, what you see is that it's a painting made up of a bunch of little small individual paintings. So in a way, this one is more beautiful. It's not what it seemed to be, but it's something even more beautiful. And of course, there's a lot of things that come to mind when you look at something like this. The picture of us as a church, a unified body made up of a bunch of different stories and understandings and beliefs and being unified. Often, when we come to a challenge in life, it can be different than what it seems to be initially. I want to, from here, look at that passage that was read earlier, that Nathan read from Jesus, and see what Jesus has to tell us here about moving through change and the way that we perceive things. Now, I'm not going to reread the whole thing. This is Matthew 25, so obviously right before this is Matthew 24. And if you're familiar with the passage, this is where Jesus is telling us, the same as he does at the end here, to keep watch, be ready. Something is coming. A lot of times that can be interpreted as the last days. That's what Jesus is talking about. Others will say that's more about the destruction of the temple that's going to come. Or it could even be Jesus' death and resurrection that he's talking about. Either way, he's telling us, be ready, get ready. And so that's the immediate context for this. So we'll just read this here together. The foolish ones said to the wise, give us some of your oil. Our lamps are going out. No, they replied, there may not be enough for both us and you. Instead, go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourselves. But while they were on their way to buy oil, the bridegroom arrived. The virgins who were ready went in with him to the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, others also came. Lord, Lord, they said, open the door for us. But he replied, truly I tell you, I don't know you. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour. I'm going to refer to something Gene said earlier as well here. Jesus often provokes questions from us, or asks questions, or answers with questions. I think one of our challenges, especially for those of us who've been in the church a long time, is to read a familiar passage and not see something new in it. But reading this, I'd be curious what questions come to your mind. What about it seems odd? Is there anything you would ask Jesus about this? Because to me, a couple things come to mind. This is in Matthew. And earlier in Matthew, we have the Sermon on the Mount, which is one of the most famous teachings of Jesus. And there he says, give to everyone who asks you. And don't turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. But then he has a parable here where you have a couple sets of ladies, and some come to the others and say, would you share with us? They say, no. There won't be enough for us if we share. Now that hardly seems like a good Christian response, or a good, kind response like Jesus might otherwise encourage. So of course, part of the question is, so what's going on? What's Jesus saying? Another question comes to mind. Why does the judgment, the punishment, so to speak, at the end seem so harsh on what otherwise seems like something of a careless mistake? They forgot to bring oil, they fell asleep. Why these strong words at the end of the story? And why is the bridegroom late for his own wedding party? Why, would that not have changed the story had he arrived on time? I don't know. These are questions that maybe make us think, but it's also helpful maybe to pull back for just a minute and look at a little bit of the larger context of Matthew and say, what's going on? A lot of people believe that Matthew was written probably just after 70 AD, early 70s perhaps, which if you know your history, what was the major event that happened in 70 AD? Destruction of the temple, right? Which was a massive event, and a lot of Jews ended up going to Antioch, which is where some assume the Gospel of Matthew was written to Jews in Antioch who are now dealing with and moving through change and how to reinterpret everything they've known now that the temple, even though they're following the Messiah, they're still Jewish, and they have this question. And so some theologians will say that each gospel has a particular question, maybe that it's addressing in the spiritual walk. And for Matthew, that question is, how do we face change? How do we move through change? This photo here, Beck and I had the blessing of getting to go to Israel with LCU on a trip just a few weeks ago. And this picture shows some of those stones that they assume were from 70 AD when the temple was destroyed. So helps to think, as a Jew, how would you process that? Even today in Jerusalem, there's the Wailing Wall where people are still remembering this big event that happened. So if that is the context of Matthew, or at least a context, of course, there's so many different ways of understanding and different thoughts on how to interpret. But with that being the context, if we were to go back to the story, how might that help us? A year ago, I was able to teach a class in Malawi on the Gospels, and it was with the Discipleship Training Institute in Malawi. It's our discipleship program, 2-year program, which again, I'll talk more about later. But we got through Matthew, and we ended up talking about this same parable in the class. These are some of the students from that class. And we were going through it and looking at that as a context, and a couple things came out of that, and some of which I'll just share with you. Thinking about the question that I asked there previously, those odd instances, those odd things in that parable. Why won't the women share? Why can't they? If we're looking at what Jesus is doing here, and he's already said, get ready for change, get ready for something that's coming. Maybe the better question is not why won't the women share? Why can't they? Is there something about the oil that is not shareable? One thought that came is, if the oil is talking about your spiritual journey, or your spiritual readiness, or your spiritual transformation, then it's not something that can be shared, right? You can't donate your spiritual journey to me in a time of crisis. I can't donate the transformation that's taken place in my life to you when you come to some point in life that requires it, right? It's something that Jesus is saying, you're going to have to do this. The other interesting thing, I think, in the parable is you have wise and foolish, which is similar to Proverbs in the way that wisdom and folly are pitted against one another. As we talked about this with the discipleship students, one of them, kind of thinking through this, came up with something that I thought was really profound. They said, so I wonder if Jesus is saying, get ready so that you can move through anything that comes in life. And the way they said it, kind of, can you get to a place where your external circumstances do not affect your internal state? Can you make it to a place in your journey where you can trust, have faith, again, like Gene was talking about earlier? Very simple in a sense, but can you make it to a place where you are ready for what comes, regardless of what it is that comes? Because internally you've done the work. In our first few years in Malawi, we were meeting with a group of missionaries from all different regions that kind of, or at least in this area, come together, and there was a Bible study, and the passage we were going over was where Jesus was driving out demons, and the disciples come to a person with a demon and try and drive drive it out, and they fail to, and they say, Lord, why couldn't we drive it out? And if you remember, Jesus says this kind can only come out by prayer and fasting. And I'd always thought of that passage to be kind of saying, so Jesus is saying to the disciples, go away, pray, fast, and come back, try again. Or, pray and fast right there. That's how this will take place. But somebody in that group, a lady, said something that I haven't forgotten. She said, I think what Jesus is saying, or perhaps the way Jesus was, he had already lived a life of prayer and fasting. That was his lifestyle. So when the moment came, he was ready for it. When that instance came to deliver someone, he didn't have to go fast and pray because his oil was full, so to speak. He had lived a life that was ready for whatever was going to come. And I think with that in mind, perhaps that helps with the end of the parable. And I think always with parables, it's challenging to say, this is what it means, or, this is what Jesus is saying for sure. Because I think parables are there for that very purpose of making us ask and wrestle and continue to discover something new. But as we get to the end of that parable, and the response of the one in the bridegroom in the party saying, I don't know you, maybe that is similar. Maybe it's saying something of this idea that you can't gain peace from a God who you don't know when the time comes, when the time of crisis. Now we know that God is always present. God is always ready to hear us cry and to hear those who don't know him cry out. So that context set aside. But for the parable, Jesus may be making a point to say, you can't draw on something that you don't have when the time comes if you haven't prepared for it. Because Jesus knows things are coming. And so he's encouraging people, be ready. Be ready for what comes. Because the point is, the truth is, something always goes wrong, doesn't it? We never really come to a place where we're like, okay, I'm past all the difficulties. There's nothing else coming. In the last couple of weeks, I've had just several really good days, both work-wise, family-wise, otherwise. And I was kind of reflecting on this, not in a bad way, but the last year has been one of the more challenging years in our family's life, and I haven't had too many of these really great days. And during one of my prayer times, I was kind of reflecting on this and thanking God for it, and I kind of felt God say, with a laugh, enjoy it. It's not going to last forever, kind of thing, And the context was good, and I could receive that because that's the way it is. And I think we get to that place where the assumption is, if I can get to the next good thing, then life will be good. But really, life is challenging, and things come, and things always come. So I think that's part of what Jesus is saying. Do the work now. Take the time now to pray, to be still, to read, to do things that fill us for the times that come. Because we won't be ready. We're not going to be, we won't have knowledge of when those things come, but we can work to be ready for them. So as we come towards the end here, one story of journey and change and being willing to receive something new. One of these students that we have at DTI, I could tell you stories of several of them, but since some of this took place in that context with those students, one of the students' names was Zacchaeus. They graduated. And we had one class on Restoration Movement history, the Stone Campbell movement, which is some of our history, if you don't know that. And it was really an amazing class for these students because it was kind of a family tree of where does our church lineage, where do we come from, at least in part. And at the end of this class, we asked the students to write a paper on what is your vision of the Church of Christ. And they'd all been amazed to see that we started as a unity movement, and then, of course, there were divisions. But we said, okay, knowing the Church of Christ in Malawi, what is your vision for the Church of Christ? And generally, just so some of you know, but generally in Malawi, the Church of Christ has is more conservative in some way and has a view of being the true church. And I don't fault that the way that I might have in the past. A lot of times, some of that teaching has come from us, from missionaries in the past. But a lot of times people grow up in a congregation in the village, and they receive what they receive, and they grow with it. And so when they come to Namikango, we had time to go through and take them through the DTI program. One of the students put this in his paper. He said, we need to restore the movement of our fathers, Stone Campbell. And again, it might have been better if he had said, restore the movement of Jesus, but that was the intention, right? This is the context of the class. Restore the movement of our fathers, Stone Campbell, of unifying all Christians. The Church of Christ should change and bring grace and good in good news to all its services, and I will help do this. Now, some of that is English second language, so you have to read through it, but you can get the point of what's being said there. And even there, it just represents a journey, represents a walk from one place to another, that wanting to see all Christians unified, wanting to see God bring people together and to be a part of it. And so, again, it's the kind of thing we've all gotten to be a part of, watching transformation take place, maybe transformation in our own lives, but it's an amazing thing to see and get to walk with people through change, in spite of the fact that it can be difficult and hard. So, as we close here, I don't know where you are. I don't know if you're in a season of peace, where things are better, in a sense, or if you're anxious about something that's coming. But I want to close here sharing a quote from Annie Dillard, a poet and author, that is very helpful when thinking about this. Oh, skipped past. She says, how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. How we spend our days is how we will spend our lives. What we do with our seconds and our minutes and our hours makes up our lives. So what are you going to do with your minutes and hours today, this week? What change can you make? What decision can you make that will affect what you do? Because what we do now is what we will always do, right? Unless we change it. Now, maybe some of you are going through a storm right now. Maybe you've hit the moment of change and weren't ready for it, or were ready for it and it's just so big and difficult and painful that it's hard to process through. Well, I don't have easy words or something simple to say to that. Look at Matthew's gospel, though, and I see at the beginning of Matthew's gospel, he talks about a baby who's going to come, whose name will be Emmanuel, God with us. And this boy is Jesus. And by the end of the story, Jesus is saying to us, I am with you always. So from beginning to end, we hear God saying, I'm with you. Through no matter what you're going through, I will be with you.